Hey everybody, how's it going? Andrew here. I just want to say real quick, if anyone is struggling to define their goals or don't have a plan in place with your game marketing, and because of that, it's making things challenging for you, then take a moment, go to my website, rengenmarketing.com, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my email list. Why? Because doing so will get you delivered right to your inbox a free marketing plan template specifically designed for games. Look, I've already verified recently that 2 college professors have used this in their courses and shared it with their students because they understand the value and how helpful it is for them to plan out what their marketing looks like. What's really awesome is simply the fact that these professors are incorporating marketing and this level of marketing into their courses because, again, they understand the value that marketing plays. So it's really exciting to hear this. But on top of that, lots of other people have utilized this template, have found it really helpful for them to further define their goals and provide them clarity and direction in what they need to do to make things happen with their awareness efforts. So again, if any of this sounds like it could be helpful for you, then please just check out the website, rengenmarketing.com, scroll down, sign up for that email newsletter, and then right to your inbox, you will get that free marketing plan template. So again, can't thank you enough for being such great listeners. And now let's get right to the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about mastering your game's market positioning. Now, fully understanding the market demand for a commercial game is essential. And leading with a genre that is in high demand is a great start, but many don't think to dig deeper and find the gold nuggets that additional market research can reveal. So in today's episode, we're going to be discussing where most people go wrong with their research, how to further validate your game, and identify tips and tricks that will give your game an edge over the competition. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have an amazing guest. Tavrox is here with us. Tavrox, how's it going, buddy? It's been a long time since we chatted.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, of course. Well, for those of you who aren't familiar with Tavrox, he's this CEO of Tavrox Games, and he's currently making Neurodeck, which is a roguelike deck builder about mental health. So not only a cool concept for a game, but also you have that mental health component, which is amazing. But that aside, you're also a marketer and producer. You've done like lots of projects. I know you've worked at Goblin Studio, which is a really great publisher out there. And just, beyond all that, you just have so much, lots of game marketing experiencing lots of game marketing experience, just helping all sorts of indie games with their strategy and communication campaigns. I know you've written some really helpful articles in the past, really insightful stuff, lots that you are involved with on the marketing front. But with that all said, I'm also curious, is with all that you're doing on the marketing front, what are other things that you do when you have some downtime, hobbies, things that you like to enjoy?
Let's say I really like politics. I tend to read and watch a lot of things, and I really like that we are trying to function as a society. And I think it's interesting to kind of understand and check out the dynamics. So yeah, I like to read about politics in general.
Nice. Yeah, because those dynamics can get pretty crazy, but having a better understanding and an open mind to them is always a good position to be in. I use that word intentionally because we're going to get into that in a moment. But thank you for sharing that. But before we do talk about positioning, we're going to have you go through the Q box round. And folks, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's just a series of some random questions I prepared here for Tavrox today. So are you ready for the Q box round?
Yeah, let's go for the Q box.
All right. All right. What's the most common mistake you've seen devs or studios make with their games?
So I would say that they tend to rush the idea in the sense that they do the game, they make some pre-production, they prepare the prototype, they think about the game, the theme, the genre, and they do the game, and they just go on with it, and they never question like, will the game will be working? So they tend to put too much energy into one game that even at the beginning they didn't make some market positioning and market study, so it's hard to find some to have some good sales for the game when it releases. So now what I say to indies is that the pre-production, while you are studying the game and making the game, if you fail this part, it will already be like a path for failure afterwards. It's not the only thing that you should care about, but it's very important that you do a good market study and market research with your positioning.
Good points there for sure. Now that's next one is, what's one thing that most people don't know about you?
One thing, it's a good question. I would say that it's often hard to explain like how much being a CEO nowadays in games is very like a lot of different tasks. You can do marketing, you can do business. When you are more technical, you can do development, game design, and such. And so yeah, I think a lot of people know more about my marketing and business side, but less about the design and programming part. And I'm not like a superstar programmer or anything, but yeah, it's still a component. And I think that's one of the thing I like most in games is that you can really do a lot of different activities and just be inside productions.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing to call out too, because it's like, you can get known for some of these things and stuff, but it's cool because there's a lot of value, I'm sure, that's associated with being a designer as well as a marketer, because it's just they really work hand in hand with each other. So
yeah, that's one of the key things that I really liked at Goblin Studio is that Johan, the CEO of Goblin Studio, is also a programmer, a developer, and it had a huge impact on how we created the publishing line and how we created the marketing of different games. So yeah, I think it's very important that I think it's also cool when you are a full marketer and you are specialized in it. But if you want to kind of have a dual class or dual class like in RPGs, it's also cool as well. There is always a bit for everything. So yeah.
Nice. All right, and last but not least, and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
I'm creating a new game which is an auto battler in space, like you are creating armies of spaceships, and so I'm playing a lot of auto battlers game. I'm very interested in this kind of a new genre, so I play Hearthstone Battlegrounds and League of Legends TFT. So yeah, kind of battlegrounds, auto battler nowadays.
Good titles and fun ones too at that. So thank you so much for sharing that. And so we can get a little bit, more info about you and what you're doing and stuff. So now that said, we're here to really get into this discussion, which I think is super important one for everybody. I know you're going to agree with me.
Yeah.
Right. But still want to dive deep on this topic, which is mastering your game's market positioning. Because Hey, like you said, you called out to how that's one of the main mistakes that you see a lot of, and I can relate to that too. But sometimes it's really hard to understand. Like, hey, we know this is important, but
Mhm.
but how do you go about doing it and stuff? But first and foremost, let's kick off things with, you know, where, like, meaning where do you think most people go wrong with how they position their games in the market? You alluded a little bit to it earlier, but let's dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, so there is this idea that um, game development is kind of new. I would say it's like a young medium, and so we don't always have the right methods or right ways to do it. At least there is new ways to do it, but I would say that making the pre-production very complete. Like for instance, the newcomers indies, they tend to do no pre-production at all, or they will just rush the production. They will just try the first ideas they have in mind, or just follow the passion projects they have. So the thing is that you really have to calculate, estimate, and also read. One very good thing, we can discuss more about it later, but say one simple thing you can do is like reading the reviews of your competitors, of your possible competitors, and check out what people are expecting from your future game. So yeah, I think the positioning where they go wrong is really the first month of the pre-production of the game. That's where the people mostly go wrong. I would say.
So they go wrong because they get this drive, ambition, and everything else, and simply just focus on that, opposed to like finding out what else might be helpful in that really important stage of developing the concept.
Yeah, and it's also cultural because I would say in France we don't have this marketing culture compared to the US. I would say where we tend to just go with the passion, and I think it's also interesting that you try to combine the two. For instance, one simple thing is when you are doing you're starting a new game. I would say it's important to have like 3 or 4 ideas, and for each ideas you spend half a day checking out the competitors, some basic numbers, and checking out the market before choosing one of these ideas. So at the minimum, um, yeah, trying to combine, sorry, passion and marketing
You know,
positioning.
yeah, no, you make an interesting point, and I just want your opinion. I know you may not know the answer to this, and that's perfectly fine. But you mentioned how in France, and I mean, I'm sure that's just part of your opinion too. But you said in France that like maybe some of the culture there isn't necessarily leading with a marketing mindset or whatever. It's like leading with that passion. Do you think this could be something else that's common in, like, let's say, other cultures, countries, just people in general?
Yeah, I think in the European market, it's much more driven by passion and culture. Maybe also because we are really like thought about the arts, like games
Mm,
being arts, and I think a lot of time it's a mix of product and art.
hmm
And if you only consider art like this, you will be likely blind to the marketing and communication part of it. And what's very real about this view of like art-driven games, it's that often they don't put enough budget in marketing, and that's where it's hard for people like me who work on other games, because sometimes the budget are really like tiny compared to American or Canadian productions,
mm.
and so that's also where it's not like it evolved a lot. But 8 years ago when I started, marketing was not like part of the production, and
Mm.
it was like a more support, I would say. And today we realize that marketing is very important in production and can really shape up the final production in the beginning. So yeah, we are seeing more and more marketing being helpful to make art games and good art product in general.
Yeah, no, really interesting points. And To kind of go a little bit further from there too, I want to talk a little bit more about actually conducting, research. We know it's important and everything else, but still, I feel a lot of us out there, it's kind of a gray area in terms of how to
Yeah.
tackle these things. So, what would you say are the key steps involved with conducting effective market research for a game?
Yeah. Yeah, and also production in general, because it's related. So I would say the first thing is to take some time. It can be hard when you are like kind of finishing a game and you have to start up or start the next game production, but take some time to play games, to see movies, to read books, and to do a lot of different things, travel if you can. And this time will be really important because you have to think about many different ideas and what can be interesting both for you and for the market and for the studio if you have a full team. So, for instance, what we did at Taros Games for our new projects is making, like, during 1 month, everyone could add a one-liner to a wall table, a wall board on Miro. And so you had like a 60 one-liner and just finding ideas that are cool, because we know in marketing or in game production, we say we don't like idea guys, like people who just give idea, but the idea is still very important because that's what you sum up in one line and what you share with the people in general. You see the little description on Steam, that's really a one-liner or a two-liner, and it has to be solid from day one to the release. So having a lot of different ideas, 40s to 60s, and then you filter out these ideas, what are the most promising. So to check out the most promising, I would say look if there are competitors for it. Because when there is no competitors, it's often that there is no market for it. But if you have a few competitors that are doing well, try to check out why they are doing well and why there are no other competitors that joined this market. For instance, let's say you want to make an automation game like Factorio. You will see that there is a few games like Factorio or Satisfactory, etc. But why do they have few games like it? It's because they are very complex and technical games. Also, why are there like no MOBA or no MMORPGs nowadays, or very few? It's just because it's very complex and it takes a big budget to make them. So sometimes doing a good market research is also about identifying why an idea could be good, but why it hasn't been done by other people as well. And that's where it can be difficult to analyze. So after that, when you have like 4 or 5 ideas filtered out, you have really to make the pre-production visually with an artist, and you have to find the theme and genre around the idea. Because games are not only ideas or marketing, they are also visual. So you really have to care about what kind of visuals you want to share with your game, with your players.
Yeah. I was just going to comment. I think that part too was really important to provide additional clarity and for the vision and everything else. When you're talking about even getting an artist at an early stage could be really helpful for really providing, that vision and everything.
Yeah, for instance, there is an interesting game that is called Blooming Business. I don't know if you know this game.
Mm-mm.
So it's a Blooming Business casino. It's a management game about a casino. The idea can be cool. There can be some pitfalls, but it's interesting and it sparks some attention at least. But they did an art direction that is cute with animals and such. And I think that's where one of the places where the project kind of maybe took a wrong turn is that they tried to mix cute with a mature or adult genre or pitch, I would say. And that's kind of the same way for several games. For instance, some indies, they want to make Souls-like game that are very hard, and they will put a colorful, a joyful theme on it, uh, like Zelda Breath of the Wild, for instance. But they don't understand that the idea and the pitch and the genre are also linked to the visuals, and
Mm.
you have to make something that is consistent for the players, because otherwise they won't will be like very confused about the mix of idea and visuals.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very valuable point because, and this is when I come across too sometimes with clients when you're looking for this unique art style or whatever to differentiate, to stand out. But what happens is those visuals can communicate a different type of game than what you might actually be making. And there comes that disconnect and confusion and basically creating fiction. So
Yeah,
I think that's a very valid point, not just what we led in with about having that clear defined vision, but also making sure that that vision also aligns with the market, is a good fit for the market. So you're not entering this one position, one spot of the market, and then realizing, oh, we set it up where we're kind of in two split places, but we really need to be in one.
yeah. You know, we talk a lot about hooks in marketing.
Yep.
So really like trying to pull the player and make him or them interested in the game. But I think we should also talk about like counter hooks, where you are
Mm.
interested by an idea, but after you check out the Steam page, you see, oh, this is not what I expected, or this is not interesting to me, and I like the idea but not the execution behind it. And it can happen really often, I think.
That is such, I think, an awesome gold nugget right there. Counter hooks. We always focus on the hooks. What's that feedback loop? What's the mechanic, right? But what are the counter hooks? Okay, we're not going to talk about it,
Yeah,
but because
yeah,
I feel like we could go on forever. But sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
it's okay. No, it's also. I think the more and more players are aging, and the more they will care about counter hooks. For instance, people that have a whole family and a few minutes to spare for their games, they will like really be careful about how long a game is, and it will
Mm.
change their method of playing, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it sounds like a counter hook, if used appropriately, and I know we're not going into explanations or anything like that, but basically it's a means to
Yeah,
set those expectations for players. Because if they go into it with this idea of one thing that let's say if you're over promising or under delivering with your hooks, then that could be negative reviews or bad
yeah,
exposure or whatever. Not bad, but just not what you're looking for. So it's about
yeah.
setting those expectations. Um, I want to dive into a couple of things real quick, though, because you mentioned some things that I thought were very valuable, but I want to get to know more and kind of play devil's advocate a little bit. So going back, you mentioned like, hey, when you're doing some market research and stuff, it's not just about like one of the key things you could do is play other games. And you know what? I think that makes sense for a lot of people, a lot of developers. But why movies? Why read books? Like, what are these other elements? How can they possibly be helpful for the development of the game, or what we're here talking about for the actual marketing of it? I mean, what are those things going to help us actually from a marketing positioning standpoint?
I think it will also shape up like how you do the game in final. For instance, um, like Nolan is shipping a movie, I
Hmm.
would say Oppenheimer, and he made an interview and he said something like the atomic bomb for him was like the most important drama he could write about, is the idea of discovering the atomic bomb. And so it's not something you can hear in games. What is the most dramatic thing you can put in motion
Mm.
and make a movie about? And so that's where being inspired by other mediums, it can give you a fresh perspective on themes
Mm.
and also on what's important for players or for spectators. So yeah, that's also why I think watching movies or watching TV shows, for instance, the theme can be very different. For instance, nowadays narrative games have a hard time on Steam. But I also think they have a hard time because their core mechanics is not very adapted to games anymore, like following a story from A to Z.
Mm.
And that's where I think you can get inspiration, even from big TV shows like Marvels, where they have
Yep.
a whole universe of franchise and licenses, and you can get a bit of information from every hero, different hero. So yeah, that's where I think games can sometimes look on itself and trying to be really like a bubble, but getting some new vision of what can be done from other mediums is still interesting. And even in books, um, some people say that we don't read books anymore, but the statistics say that we still read books, and the younger audience is passionate about books. And you saw that there is a Harry Potter's legacy that is now a video game, a good video game, I would say. And so that's where the cross between books, movies, video games is still very interesting because it gives you new perspective on making games.
Yeah, no, those perspectives are definitely important. And also a lot of times too, they have themes in which really resonate with those audiences, with people within that market and such. So, I mean, really valuable insight there. And thank you for elaborating a little bit further in terms of, how those things are important, because I think a lot of times we don't necessarily think that they are, and it's more of a waste of time when it's really adding that much more depth and an opportunity to connect with the audience a little bit more.
Yeah, we can also say something about playing games for the positioning, because that's one very important part. One thing about why it's important to play games, and that's something I learned from Steve Philby, who is leading Evil Empire and helped the marketing of Dead Cells, is that he once told me, I once asked him, how do you do that the developers are playing the games you are asking them to play? And he just said to me, ask them every fucking day and just go to them, ask them to play the game. And they are always happy to play games, and they say, oh, this is a cool mechanic, we should have this. And that's where people who play your games, they will know the competitors in general, and so they will make comparison between each other. And if you don't know the core games of your competitors, what features they have, what features are people looking for, you will have a hard time understanding what they like or love about the genre you are proposing. So that's why I play auto battlers nowadays. It's because I know that people will be looking for certain features and certain stuff, but also some difference and some originality in the genre. So yeah, it's important to play other games as well.
So let's talk about that a little bit more, because again, you mentioned it earlier, and I do want to dive in deeper in terms of how you can really leverage, this research for your positioning of your game. So playing different games, getting a sense of what those mechanics are, especially from your own perspective with making a game, you get in a sense of, oh, I really like this. Maybe I could do this a little bit differently. But on top of that, I mean, one thing you mentioned is like reading reviews from competitors. And it's still, folks, I know sometimes we don't like to think of other game developers or studios as competitors, but I mean, if it's a competitive market and there are other players in that market, by definition, they are competitors. It doesn't mean they're out to get you or vice versa. But it's still competition you need to be aware of. But regardless, what are some of the things that we can find or learn from these reviews, some of this information? Because I know it can be a lot of work to sift through, but like, what are some of these gold nuggets that we can find in this research that can actually be applicable to everything from marketing or even into the product itself?
Yeah, when I was talking about competitors, it's really in the logical sense.
No, I know you are
working with other studios. But yeah, it's a good point to say, because sometimes people can view it as like a tough competition, but it's more like people make games in general.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, reviews. I think one interesting stuff is the kind of gate, or really like a hard gate, like what make people stop playing the game.
Mm.
Also, people who played a lot of the game, like they spend 300 hours and they put a negative review. It happens. And what triggers them to put this negative review? So Hardgate, like long players. I would say also sometimes people are asking for features. So that's where it's really easy for you because you just have to list the features they are asking for. I would say also the average and median playtime, because you know that it will kind of shape up how much playtime you want in a game. And yeah, that's mostly it. I would say obstacles, long-term things for players, the features, and the playtime.
Yeah, and those are some like I like that because I think there's with that process, it's very simple, like outlining
Yep.
and those like kind of like through the, like playtime. But then I mean, there's going to be more that you can dive in from that. But I think looking at it with that framework can really make the process a little bit easier and further understand things. Now, I'm sure as from that framework, there's a lot of other either revelations or ideas or other things that can be addressed.
Yep.
And so with those things in mind, how can maybe some of those things can be used to better understand your product, especially with positioning it, your game's features, your proposition, or unique selling proposition. Like
Yeah.
how can that information then be taken and understood and then put into basically your hook?
Yeah, and that's what the notion of USP is kind of weird, because sometimes you can play a game and love it, and you cannot really say why it's unique, or it's not like a big idea, or it's just that it's well executed. For instance, Dead Cells is like, how would you sum up Dead Cells?
Yeah, I mean I'm thinking it's just like a roguelike platformer, action platformer that's like borderline with like, Metroidvania basically.
Yeah. Yeah, but you can say that about a ton,
Yes.
dozens of games.
Yes, exactly.
And yet Dead Cells, it has kind of no USP besides, I would say, like excellent game feel. But players, they don't really say game feel or anything. So yeah, that's where USP are very strange, because a lot of games we play, we just love them not because of unique features, but sometimes how well they are done, and that's also a feature you should care about. But yeah, market research really helps on understanding the USP, because you compare it with other games and you think about each features you want to add into the game, and you think about, is it something you can sell to the player? Is it something you can show to the player, which is different? Because sometimes you have games that are very hard to explain or to showcase. For instance, let's say Factorio or Dwarf Fortress. These games are impossible to showcase visually, but people love them and they are unique. And so that's why sometimes you have to think about the features in terms of visuals and how you can showcase them. And it's not always easy to showcase the features.
Yeah, I have my own experience with that, and in terms of like, hey, how do you provide that visual context? And that's just as important as everything else, especially in this day and age where there's so many distractions, especially online. The one main thing that you're going to have to make a first quick impression is going to be with a visual. And if there's context like to go with that, that's in a textual format, that's secondary. So you're absolutely right.
And for instance, Vampire Survivors is a good example, because you just see that there are a shit ton of monsters, good particles, projectiles, and such. So it's very visual. And I also think it's one of the key reasons why it's working is because you can see the action. you can see there are things happening. And for instance, in game design, that's interesting because between 5 enemies and 1 million enemies, for instance, in the game there are billions. It's in the name, and you can see that there are indeed billions of zombies.
Mm,
So it's very visual, and it worked because it's very visual, and it fits the pitch behind it.
yeah. And again, I think it's important to clarify too that there's a lot that can communicate in the visuals, whether it be the style of art and things like that. But then there's also like key components, like you just outlined, like by seeing the zombies and stuff, that clearly gives a good representation or idea of, visually, what is this game about? Because sometimes we get caught in the idea of, hey, we're focused in our game so much, and hey, this looks like a good action shot, or this looks like it could be very informative, when from an outsider, people may not have any insight to that. So the research behind in terms of those things and how you're aligning those things are just as important as just the other types of information.
Yeah, and that's something I learned with my co-production with Miju Games that made Planet Crafter. It's that they care about also the fantasy and what you are fighting against. For instance, with when you make a game about mecha or big dinosaurs or things like that, it's very visual and people love it because it's the fantasy, the power fantasy is fighting big robots and such. And even if it's simple and not original, people like the epic part of it. Elden Ring did this really good, and Dark Souls in general. But I would say Elden Ring is the best at this because it's really about having the most epic fights, epic scenes. Even if the fight against the boss is kind of meh in the end, it's just the scenery and having the fantasy to live epic stuff. And even games like Factorio, it can be epic through managing a city, managing a factory, or things like that. When you see Factorio, it's very ugly, and if you don't like or have never tried the automation game, it's easy to think that this is a crap shit where you cannot read anything. But when you are playing it, it's so hooking and addictive that it's the reason why it's one of the biggest hits on Steam.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's probably worth to calling out that visuals and quality, like quality is very subjective, right? I think, I mean, there's high production value with a quality product, right? But not always, because from at least our standpoint in this discussion here is more so of the context aspect of the visuals opposed to the quality, because there is that subjective component to it. I mean, granted, it's a bell curve, right? Because there is a lower end to it where it looks like okay, but at the same time, I'm thinking, I forgot the name now. The game name is a platformer. It's a number. I talked about a long time ago, but it just uses shapes and very basic stuff. But it's like high contrast and stands out, and you could say that it's high quality, but it's very simple. So I guess that might be the distinction. And you already said that too. Is it's not necessarily from a quality perspective, so to speak. It's more from a visual, contextual one, or the visual context in terms of how that communicates information.
And that's where we bounce back to market positioning, is that sometimes during pre-production, you will do the visuals kind of quick, or you will like not think about making different kind of themes or art style. You will just make one art style and go for it. And you really have to test different art styles and see what could be very interesting for the game, but also for the players. For instance, one art style that is kind of lacking, I think nowadays, is things like Don't Starve. There is this creepy, cute themes that is very interesting. I think there are some underserved or like underrepresented niche that still have some players that are looking for content.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be like AAA or anything. It has to be like interesting, and it's hard.
I
But
that's another I think hidden one that a lot of people don't think about too much, but creepy cute. I know some people making creepy cute games with their own lens and stuff. I mean, what is it? Another great example I think is like Cult of the Lamb,
yeah,
a more
that's
popular
it.
one. And I've worked with someone a long time ago for Facebook campaign, and their artwork. They did their own artwork, and it was like kind of creepy cute too. And that was probably one of the most successful campaigns I've ever helped run because it was just so gravitating. And it's still a common thread, but you just don't see it too much. No, that's another interesting, I think, call out there because of how those visuals can communicate. And again, I think it goes back to where it's like you just, I think, outlined really quickly, analyzing the market, understanding what's there, and especially from a visual perspective, okay, one, because if the more you know the audience, right?
Yeah.
And going back to those concepts that you mentioned too about why it's important to look at books, TV shows, movies. If you understand all those other things that they really like, and let's say there's some interesting correlation that like a lot of them like, I don't know, I'm throwing things off the top of my head, manga or this particular art style or whatever the case may be that pops up and you see this common trait. It's like, well, okay, everybody seems to like this, but everybody in the market doesn't have a game that looks like this.
Yeah.
Maybe that could be now that unique position that we take to really differentiate ourselves. And it's that whole process and accumulation of what that information like kind of bubbles up where you can then make that call and something unique, fun, and hopefully it's in line with what you and the rest of the team wants to make too, because just making it for the market is important, but shouldn't be the end all be all.
Yeah, that's where the indies have really good power here. Is because they are more like 2D or light 3D, I would say. They really have to, the players they will get don't care that much about the graphics, but they care about the identity of the game. And so that's why you have to use your power as an indie game developer, is that your players they will be more forgiving than AAA. For instance, AAA players sometimes like there is no ray tracing or anything, as they will be like panicked. So yeah, that's where indies have a big proposal and power into this step, is trying to make a game that is visually unique, and that's still a lot of work. But yeah, it's important.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the investment. Now, with that said, if there's any that you can think of or whatever, because we talked a lot about kind of the process, how to like drill down into this, how can we take this information, apply it. But in sometimes I know it can be very tedious and manual work. But outside of that, do you know of any like, other methods or even potentially tools for gathering some of this data and insight?
Yeah, so one of the methods is kind of simple. So it's called benchmarking. There are different kind of benchmarking, but the one I like to do is an Excel table. So you take an Excel table and you take 30 games that are your competitors or some games in your genre. You take the 30 games and you have to take 10 games that were big hits, 10 games that were medium, and 10 games that really failed. Because you need a really good sample of what are the shit games or what are the good games. And if you don't do that, you will have a skewed perspective about your audience. So you take these 30 games and you apply the calculations on how much units they sold with the box later method. And you see how much they have done in kind of money, or at least an estimate. And when you have those 30 games with the estimate, you take the median and the average. One interesting thing when I did the deck builder market analysis is that I saw that deck builders in general, the median revenue of a deck builder was 30k euros, and it's exactly what my first games did. My first deck builder did, and what the second one will do is this kind of median of 30k, It's not really high, so yeah, that's not a good news. But it's where the power of numbers is very interesting. Is that the markets don't really lie about the ideas and the sales of games that are already released. And if you really take the ratio of good games, medium games, and the shitty games, you have a really good perspective on this market good? Does it have a lot of competitors? When you combine it with the reviews, you can really check out the features. So I would say the holy trinity is checking out the reviews, checking out the numbers of the tables, the Excel table, and in general making a qualitative analysis about also your studio and what you can do with your studio, what you feel comfortable about doing, and what you want to do as a personal career, I would say. So mixing the three will give you a good idea about a game idea you have in pre-production for the positioning about your game.
Yeah, and I love how you position that too in terms of, you know, the benchmarks and doing your own assessment of that, because I feel a lot of time, whether it's for a studio's own goals or you know, towards release if they're self-publishing or if they're looking for a publisher, we often rely on benchmarks that are more generalized among like a particular genre, or identify a few other titles that are like, hey, they made this much, but they're generally the most successful within that genre or market, right? But it's not necessarily giving a very realistic
Yeah,
perspective. And that's probably another reason why doing this as early as possible is really helpful, because like you said, hey, you might find out that, oh wait, the medium here, in terms of the games that are very relative, as close as we can get to our game we're making, is really low.
yeah,
So what is then going to be the return on that? And hey, if you're already so invested, maybe it's a matter of shifting things so now the you know, development cycle is much shorter for so
yeah,
you can then work on the next project. So you're being a little bit more strategic with the time and things like that. But and I know that's more business sense, but still very applicable in terms of how that kind of shapes things out in terms of having that realistic understanding, because then it's going to help shape the goals, the types of activities that you do, and kind of really helps you look in a much more forward way of thinking in terms of immediate or you know, the now.
yeah. That's a good thing. It's good that you mentioned publishers because there is one like paradoxical thing. I worked with different publishers and I pitched to different publishers in the last 8 years, and it's very paradoxical because you would tend to think publishers do this kind of benchmark and positioning analysis and marketing analysis, but they don't really do.
Mm.
To be honest, the scouts and the people who sign games, they often sign games that they love and that they have like kind of a crush about. And when I worked at Goblins, it was kind of the only publisher that really looked at the data of the market and the audience. And that's also why they are doing very good, is because they analyze the markets and they are not only about the passion and artistic games. They are on both sides. They want something meaningful, but also something that is good on the market. And for instance, Hooded Horse as well is very
Mm-hmm.
good on that, I think.
Yep.
They have a more pragmatic approach to marketing. And I think some like older publishers, they will have a hard time against publishers like Hooded Horse that are really way more pragmatic and way better at market positioning.
Yeah.
So that's where you don't need to have the best market positioning in the world for all publishers. But I would say for the top publishers, it's like a big advantage because they kind of know the market more and more. But yeah, there is still a mix of publishers who some they love positioning and others they don't really care about it.
Yeah, and it's an interesting dynamic in terms of, you know, one extreme to the other, simply because I think there's a lot of publishers, at least out there, that it's more of a numbers game, meaning the more that they have in their portfolio, then the less risk that they ultimately have within reason, right? No one has an infinite budget and resources on that front. But whereas if taking a little bit more strategic approach and knowing those things, like you said, with goblins and definitely with, I know Tim Well, he's been on the show before at Hooded Horse, different subject, but still his positioning with those things, like you said, are taking that strategic approach. And some of them are a more focused portfolio, like I think Hooded Horse is. And then Goblins is maybe a little bit more open, but the bottom line still comes down to that understanding, that benchmark, and how it fits with the positioning too. To really, I can't, not the right term, but in a way, hedging your bets, so to speak, a little bit better. But I mean, in both of those examples you provided, their track record shows this. And thankfully, a lot of others, I think, are they're helping to pave the way for other publishers, not just from an ethical standpoint in some conversations, but also from a more pragmatic and doing well to really succeed. And it's not just for their own sakes, for their companies, it's also for the indies out there. So even if you can't get a publishing deal with those two in particular, let's say shout out to Goblins and Hooded Horse, the reality is taking a similar mindset and understanding that they're approaching things, whether you're self-published or even you're looking to be published, can't hurt at all. And why positioning yourselves in such a way from these types of tools and resources and everything else that we talked about here on the show is just so important, and how you're positioning yourself and really mastering that positioning.
Yeah, and it's also where I think it's a bit more clear about what you can expect, because a lot of times I would say people underestimate how much publishers just publish their friends or of games that look good but are not very fun. That happens really often, and I think for new indies it can be very tough and hard to pitch to publishers when they have no track record but they have a good positioning or a good market. And it can also be like reassuring for you if you have a good positioning and you have searched through the numbers. You can be sure that your game at least has some potential to make a bit of money, and you will. That's also why the first thing I suggest after you have done market research and pre-production is to publish your Steam page, because the hard numbers about the wish list per day you will have, it will be a big reveal about how strong your positioning is. For instance, when we launched the Legend of Keepers page, we had like 50 to 60 wishlist per day without doing anything big, just some basic marketing. And so, yeah, that's why the Steam page, you really need to have it early, I think, more and more in-game productions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. So much more of this that we need. And I'm glad we kind of really dove into these topics and stuff. And hopefully there folks listening to this have enough information to kind of like take action with this process. And even if you're further along development, it still really can't hurt to have a better sense of your positioning in the market, how to maybe better communicate things with your audience, and maybe give you a little bit of extra ammunition, so to speak, to go out and pitch to publishers or other potential partners. I mean, lots of great stuff here. And Tavrix, I can't thank you enough for being here today. But before we close, one, I would like you to provide a few tips that you could share with our listeners today based on our discussion. And then, what are ways to connect, to learn more about your game, to learn more about you, your studio. So first tips, then how to connect.
Okay, so tips, I would say it's a hard one. I would say don't be too attached to your game idea, because it's one way to really like being disappointed in the final release and the Steam page reveal and the marketing. So yeah, don't be attached too much to your game idea. Work with good artists, because when you have the idea and the conception, and they are putting this into motion with visuals and concept arts, that's where the game is really shaping up, because you will see the true potential of your game. And the third tips would be, don't underestimate the niche. Sometimes if you are like the only game in your niche or one of the only games in your niche, but you do it very well, it's still something that can really work very well, because you have a tiny audience, but at least they are looking for new things.
Mm.
And for the contact, you can find me on LinkedIn, Yannick Elahee, and also on our website, tavroxgames.com. We are kind of changing the name into Blanket Games nowadays, but yeah, it's another chapter of the book, I would say.
Okay, cool. So, folks, if you want to connect, LinkedIn is probably one of the best places to do that. That will be provided in the show notes, and also Tavrox Games, which is also or becoming or will have Blanket Games too. One and the same thing. But again, those links will be there. So if you're looking for a potential partner to work with, or you just want to get some more insight from Tavrox from either our conversation today or anything else that he knows from a marketing and development perspective, he is definitely open for those. Yep. Great guy. We've been chatting for over years, give or take. And now we're finally connecting in this awesome capacity to have this discussion. So Tavrox, can't thank you enough for being here today and providing so much valuable insight that I hope that our listeners got a lot of value from today.
Thank you for the invitation. That was cool talking with you.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.